Thank you for joining in. The purpose of this talk is to share the power of the words, I don't. And we actually had a little song, an I don't jingle, but we've been unable to get it up. Anyway, I am a counselor and a therapist. For 25 years, I have worked with people, listened to their stories, and I have tried to understand the connection between words, the meaning of words, and how the words affect people's lives cognitively, emotionally, and physically. My initial training was as a narrative therapist. And in narrative therapy, the theory is that the person is their story. So when a new client comes for help, they often arrive with what is called a collapsed negative story. And their story has collapsed so much that all they can see is the small, painful thing that they're focusing on, and that limits their ability to see other possibilities. For example, when a person says, I am depressed and my life is a total mess, there's no space in their brain to think about anything else. And a narrative therapist will use questions to help the person deconstruct their story. And in the process, they together look for times when the problem is not there. For example, when is depression there? And when is depression not there? And in the process, we together look for what is called sparkling events in the person's life when the problem is not there. In the process, the client discovers that their problem is not always there, and that they have resources and strengths and possibilities, and together we move towards what's called a preferred story. Now, it's interesting to note that the words, I am depressed, are physically there in the brain. They're in the neurons. And when they're physically there, the person cannot get away from them. So if the person says, I'm depressed, and they're in Ottawa, they can fly to Paris, France, and if they're still saying, I am depressed in their brain, they just took the depression with them to France. The only solution that is beneficial is to help the person find new words that are not so limiting. For example, I am depressed can become, I'm not depressed all the time. I'm actually quite happy when I play the piano and when I go out for a run and when I'm on a holiday. So as I worked with my clients, I started to learn about how the brain works. I'm constantly reading the latest books about the human mind, like Dr. Norman Doidge's book, The Brain That Changes Itself. Let me share with you some of the interesting things I have discovered. Number one, for hundreds of years, the doctors believed that the brain was fixed and unchangeable. The theory was called functionalism, and they believed that every part of the brain had a function, and if part of the brain got damaged, you would lose that function, and that the brain would never create any new cells, and that function would be gone forever. But over the last 20 years, scientists like Dr. Wild Penfield in Montreal, the great Montreal physician, studied the brain and discovered what they now call neuroplasticity, which means that the brain is plastic and it can change. In fact, what they learned was that functionalism was wrong. The truth is 180 degrees different. Not only can the brain change, but it is the most changeable part of the human body. So an amazing example of the brain's capacity is Malala Yousafzai. Malala is the Pakistani girl who at age 11 was shot in the head by a young man who did not want her to go to school. The bullet entered from the left forehead and exited from the back left part of her head. After operations in Pakistan, and they flew her to England, She made an amazing recovery and was soon able to read and write and speak again. And 5 years later, at age 16, she stood at the United Nations and gave a speech. And I watched that on television, and you just wonder, how is this possible? But the brain adapted, her brain adapted. The unwounded parts of her brain took over from the wounded, damaged part of her brain and created new functions. The brain was changeable, it was plastic, and it was able to heal. Point number 2, the principle of the neuroplastic brain is use it or lose it. When you use words, you create neural pathways, and those neural pathways are physically in your brain. And what you use expands, and the neural pathways take up more space. So that brings us to point 3, competitive plasticity. Dr. Norman Doidge, in his book, The Brain's Way of Healing, talks about the ongoing competition for what he calls cortical real estate. He said words that are used take up more brain space by stealing the resources from the other areas of the brain. So what you don't use falls away, and what you do use takes over. That's why the person's repeated, collapsed negative story is so destructive, because the negative story will take over if you continue to use it. Point number 4 is that the brain and the body are all one interconnected system. And what does this mean? A positive word in the brain automatically produces a positive emotion. And a positive emotion automatically releases positive chemicals into the body so that the mind, the emotions, and the body all feel good. It's one integrated system. Conversely, a negative word produces negative emotions, and negative emotions automatically create negative chemicals like cortisol and adrenaline, and it causes the body to feel unwell. So if you dwell in a negative story, it's going to cause your whole system to feel bad. The words that you have in your head rule, and you have the ability to control the words that are in your head. Now here's the dilemma. The mind can be divided. For example, a client will say to me, part of me wants to smoke a cigarette and part of me wants to stop smoking. And these conflicting parts can fight with each other. Unfortunately, it seems that when it comes to addictions, the destructive thinking seems to win. This is where the words "I don't" come in. I don't is what's called a mental agreement. And a mental agreement is made up of words in the mind that a person has come into agreement with. Mental agreements tend to be fixed, firm, strong, and undivided. They often include words like never and always. For example, when a person says, I will never smoke again, that's a mental agreement. And what they're really saying is, I agree with myself that I am never going to smoke again. Now, behavior flows from words. The person will not smoke because the words I don't do not permit smoking. And the stronger the mental agreement, the greater the ability to win the battle for the mind. So in this example, I don't smoke can help manage the behavior of smoking. How does this all relate to addictions? Addictions tend to flow from the words that the person has accepted and with which they agree. So an example of a negative agreement is, I agree with myself that it's okay to have a cigarette after a meal. Or I agree with myself that it's okay to drink after work. I give myself permission to have a drink after work, to just take the edge off. Or I agree with myself that marijuana will help me sleep. And as you can see, negative mental agreements reinforce the addictive behavior. Did you know that Alcoholics Anonymous is only about 10% effective? And in my opinion, the cause of AA's grace-filled kindness is that's the problem. The AA group is trained to offer unconditional acceptance if and when a person relapses. They don't judge the relapse, they accept the person, and that's a good thing. But in the process, they are helping to create a mental agreement that says, it's okay to relapse. I agree with myself, it's okay to relapse. The words I don't do not permit relapse. And if you live in the eternal now, which is what I think we all do, then I don't means that I don't now and not forever into the future. So how can I don't stop an addiction? The I don't words are a mental agreement. And we know that mental agreements can be powerful. I don't is a very helpful statement because it cancels a negative. For example, I don't use non-prescription drugs. And when a person accepts the I don't statement, then the behavior will flow from the meaning of those words. So let me give you two examples related to alcoholism. I was working with a very severe alcoholic, and we discussed the subject of I don't, and I asked him to come into agreement with the words I don't drink. And he said, no, I can't say that. And he knew that when he went home that he was going to have a drink, and he was unwilling to say the words because they implied a commitment. Not only could he not say the words, he would not say the words. I couldn't even get him to say the words in front of me. It showed where he was at with his will. And when he went home, he continued to drink. The second example was an alcoholic who was just as bad as he was, the first one, but he wanted to stop drinking. He was willing to use and to commit to the words, I don't drink. He said the first 2 days were horrible. He said, I went to pour a drink of vodka into a glass, and then I said to myself, but why am I doing this? I don't drink. And so he stopped and he poured the vodka down the drain. The next day he had the urge to drink, but he didn't have any vodka. So he said, I guess I better get in my car and go to the LCBO and buy a bottle of vodka. And then he stopped himself and he said, but I don't drink. Why would I get in my car and go to the LCBO and buy a bottle of vodka when I don't drink? And he stopped himself. And he said that first week was difficult. The second week was a lot easier. And week by week, he kept winning the battle. And today the man is a complete non-drinker. Now the key is the use and the repetition of the words. Repeating I don't drink over and over builds neural pathways, and each day it becomes easier. Another client that I had was addicted to lying. He wanted to please people so badly that he would just tell them what he thought they wanted to hear. And he would say things and not correct the words, hoping that it would not come back to him. And after learning about I don't, he started catching himself beginning to lie. And he would say, I don't lie, I tell the truth. And so he stopped his lying, and his relationship with his girlfriend improved. And in the next 6 months, they reached the point where they decided they would move to British Columbia and start a new life together. So in psychology, there's a thing that's called thought stopping. I don't is one of the most powerful thought stoppers there is. I don't smoke. I don't drink. I don't do drugs. I don't lie. I don't eat sugar. I don't gamble. I don't talk too much. I don't steal. Whatever the issue is. And the brain hates a vacuum. So once you stop the negative thought, it needs to be replaced with a positive mental agreement. For example, I don't drink hard liquor. My favorite drink is water. And in my own personal story, when I was in the Foreign Service, we used to buy, as you probably remember, a bottle of gin was 80 cents. We would order a case at a time, a case of gin, a case of rye, a case of scotch. And we had these parties and we'd send everyone home drunk. But I started to feel that the second and the third and the fourth drink didn't do anything for me, so I just limited myself to one drink. And when I left the Foreign Service, I stopped even that first drink, and now I just drink water. And so I don't drink at this point. And if I go to a party, I need a glass in my hand, I get a glass of water and I drink the water, but I don't drink. So the power of the word changes the behavior. Now, beliefs are different from emotions. Emotions tend to be stored as memories from past experiences. Janina Fisher, in her book, Healing the Fragmented Selves, she says that beliefs are found in the left brain linguistic self, where meaning is created in the present. So left side of the brain is where your meaning is. I feel like a drink is right brain, and it's in the feelings, and it needs to be overruled by the left brain, and that's where I don't drink functions. So the cognitive exercise of I don't can control the feeling of the need that's based in the past memories. The decision to drink or not drink is made in the present, and I don't is a positive mental agreement in the present. Even though it's a negative word, I don't, it's a positive mental agreement. So here's what Janina Fisher says in her book, quote, "Only the brain can create a new story. For neuroplastic brain change to occur, only 3 ingredients are needed. You need to inhibit the habitual pattern of the cognitive, physical, and emotional self. So you inhibit the pattern with I don't. You start a new cognitive story to replace the old pattern. And then you practice the new word pattern over and over and over again." You see, it requires cognitive exercise because all of this is taking place in the brain. But we humans can tend to be lazy. And I've noticed that a lot of people will start using the program, and after 2 weeks, they give up because things are going better. They're starting to feel better, and so they give up. So the challenge is to keep exercising the I don't agreement. So for my conclusion, here's what I believe, that human brains need words to create meaning. Words have power. Mental agreements have greater power than just words. And I don't is a powerful mental agreement. So when used repetitively, I don't creates an ever-growing neural pathway that helps win the cortical battle. So the action plan is find your own I don't statements, practice them every day, believe in the power of I don't, and you will see the results. And when you see those results, tell others about them so that they can take advantage of I don't as well. So I'm open to any questions at this point.
Yeah.
Alf, one kind of addiction that kind of has fascinated me is that there are some people who are addicted to exercise. That is to say, something is probably a good thing, but on the other hand, they become obsessed with it. I mean, you have the people who go to the gym 3 times a day and that sort of thing. Have you ever dealt with that sort of problem where you have someone who is engaged in something good, but they do it to an extreme.
I have had one client that was like that. She would exercise like 6 hours at a time. Either she would do nothing or 6 hours a day and nothing in between. The challenge in life is balance and reasonableness, and reality is that anything that is a person's gift that's taken to an extreme becomes a negative. So if a person is persistent, but they take it to an extreme, they become stubborn. So the quality that they have that's actually their strength, when taken to an extreme, can become a negative. And so someone who's an exercise nut, who that's a strength that they have, they're taking care of their body and they're exercising, but when they take it to an extreme, it becomes a negative. And so you would need to help that person to understand what is reasonable. So in that state, in that case, I don't exercise too much would become the statement. I don't exercise to excess. I don't exercise to an extreme. I exercise the right amount for my body. And so then you would need to get the person to agree to what is reasonable. Is 2 hours reasonable as opposed to 6 hours?
Okay. Alfie, I was wondering, and because I did not hear your presentation, please don't be offended, but at the same time, there was, Ronald Reagan's wife, who had her advice to people who might be addicted, and she said, just say no. Now, I think that was very simple-minded. What's the more in-depth research that you've done there? I caught part about the plasticity of the brain and its ability to recover from injury. Can you just give me a thumbnail sketch of more about that now?
The only thing I would say is my life mission now is to get everybody in the world to understand about I don't and the power of I don't. So if I can have everybody in the world using I don't effectively, then we've won.